Martin Pakula, 1986, Attorney General and Minister for Racing in the Victorian Government. I knew nothing about Haileybury at all really before I started. My dad had come to the conclusion that I should sit for a scholarship, and he took me to a school which I didn't really like the look of much, and so he said, oh well, if you don't like that, we'll take you to another one. So we actually drove down South Road and went to St Leonard's, and as we drove out, I said, what's that place across the street? And we drove in up the front driveway, and there were goalposts up on the left hand side, and I said, this one. And that was the story of why I sat for a scholarship at Haileybury, because it had a big oval at the front with footy goalposts up, and that did it for me. My most vivid memories of Haileybury is probably the first day I turned up in grade 4. That was a pretty big change for me coming out of Ormond Primary School. And I think just all the friends, all the mates I made over 9 years at the school, in fact. I had an interest in the Labor movement from a reasonably young age, probably from my early teens. I remember writing a letter to Bill Kelty probably when I was 16 or so, but I suppose any kind of social democratic political activism at Haileybury in the 1980s was unusual. What I really wanted was to become a trade union official. You know, I did my law degree, and I liked the idea of potentially becoming a legal officer at a union or at a union peak body, and I was very lucky that I got a job in the union movement after I'd finished my articles. The National Union of Workers was, I'd probably say, still the most fulfilling thing I've done in my working life. I was a legal officer, industrial officer, organiser, assistant state secretary. I was on the board of the Industry Superannuation Fund, LUCRF. We always felt like we were doing really valuable things, you know, getting people pay rises, saving people's jobs, and I got to say I loved every minute of that place. I loved it. I never really contemplated running for Parliament until I actually did it. So there were sort of two different points. There was the pre-selection for the seat of Hotham, which I nominated for and was unsuccessful, but it's often the way that you have to lose one before you can win one. I was pretty confident that certain undertakings I'd been given by people about supporting Hotham would come to fruition. They didn't. That's a hard way to learn a lesson, but it's a good lesson to learn, and it's a good lesson to learn early. As soon as I was pre-selected for Western Metropolitan Region, as it then was, I stood down as State Secretary within a matter of weeks after that, because I think in order to run the union, you need to give that job your full attention, and I don't think it's tenable to be running for elected office and still be pretending to give your full attention to the full-time job that you've got to do. The 2006 election, I think the overwhelming emotion on election night was one of relief. I was in the third spot in Western Metropolitan Region. It seemed pretty safe, but as a candidate you never believe that until you see the votes come in. And it was sort of the double joy of winning the seat and the Brackus government being returned. And it is quite a surreal moment when you realise that you've just been elected a Member of Parliament, but very quickly your mind turns to all of the things that you need to try and organise in the coming days. So you don't have much time to wallow in the glory of having won. It was back to business pretty quickly. I was fortunate that I got a phone call from Steve Bracks 2 or 3 days after the election, offering me that role as Parliamentary Secretary for Transport. And the only answer when you made an offer like that is, thank you, Premier, I'd be delighted. So that was what I said. Before we lost the 2010 election, I'd spent 10 months as Minister for Public Transport, which was again not a role that I ever expected, but Lynn Kosky retired reasonably suddenly and I got thrust into that role. And it had been a very difficult year in 2010 with Mikey and train reliability and the like. So I think it's probably fair to say that the morning after the 2010 election, I wouldn't describe it as a sense of relief, but there was a sense of sort of weight being lifted off your shoulders. That very quickly gives way to a sense of, not quite despair, but a sense of, well, what am I going to do now? I've just spent 2 years as a minister, and now we're out in the wilderness for goodness knows how long. Myself and a number of other then shadow ministers decided to knuckle down, and we thought pretty early on that we could potentially get that government in one term if we worked hard, and that's exactly what we did. And We pulled off what was a fairly remarkable thing in getting back to government after 4 years out. The Attorney General's portfolio is an extremely complex one. I'm probably responsible for, close to half of all the legislation that comes before the Parliament comes out of my department, and issues in my portfolio bubble up from time to time. Issues like bail and sentencing and things of that nature. So it's also politically quite a hot button portfolio. I got exactly what I bargained for when I became the Attorney General. It's a significant role, and with it comes a lot of work and a lot of risk. Politics is very rewarding, and politics is a great honour, particularly to hold ministerial office. But it's also true to say it's not always fun. It's not always enjoyable. It can be very stressful. It's a very different environment. Politics is a different kind of fulfilment. It's a great sense of achievement, and it's a great honour, and you get to do things for the community as a whole. But on a personal level, it's much more taxing. I don't think you can do it as well as you should if you keep doing it well beyond the point where you're too tired to do it properly. I think that is already being a career politician. I don't think you need to do it for 20 or 25 or 30 years. I think it's important that we keep doing it for as long as we can do it fresh. The friendships, they're really strong. Even though I don't see many of the blokes very often, when you do catch up, it's like you saw them yesterday. So we had our 30-year reunion last year, and blokes like Rod Bartholomew's and Bob Marks and Paul Haslam and Russell Davidson. It's nice to be able to catch up with boys you went to school with and still have a lot in common. It gives you such great opportunities. It gave me a really great circle of friends. I feel like I got a fantastic education there. And I suppose there's a degree of confidence and self-assuredness that probably comes out of some of the people that taught you and some of the character traits you start to develop through school. Haileybury, I think, set me up with some great habits, some great friends, and it was a magnificent opportunity. And I've taken it with me right throughout my working life.